Justice Alito? Justice Sotomayor?
Returning to the standing question, the states basically say we're going to lose money in taxation in one way or another. In the Texas case, you argued that we should be looking at the cost benefit, and some of the amici here say that there will be a tremendous benefit to the states from this cancellation because that extra money will result in increased consumer spending and decreased housing insecurity, less defaults on other loans that those borrowers may have, et cetera. Do you agree with those amici that the economic benefits outweigh any alleged financial harm in this case?
As a factual matter, we do not disagree. As a legal matter, we haven't asked the court to rely on that as a basis for standing because we think that the invocation of these harms to tax revenues are so easily answered under this court's precedent. And I would point the court to the Pennsylvania versus New Jersey case. It is on all fours with this one, precisely identical. And so we just think you don't need to go down the road of thinking about some of the broader arguments about tax injury in this case because it's so clear that this court has already rejected the very injury the states are asserting under the Pennsylvania case.
In Pennsylvania, it was a tax credit that was going to be removed, so it's almost identical to this, correct?
Exactly. Pennsylvania had issued its tax credit before the New Jersey law that they were opposed to and had extended it to residents when they pay taxes in other states. And then New Jersey came along and changed its tax code to impose newly a commuter tax that would ultimately deplete Pennsylvania's tax revenues. And the court said that's self-inflicted because nothing required Pennsylvania to extend that tax credit. Nothing prohibits Pennsylvania from withdrawing it now. And that analysis applies equally here because, of course, there is nothing that requires the states to tie their definition of gross income to the federal tax code. Two of the states here, Arkansas and Missouri, don't do that. And there's nothing that prevents them from changing that if they don't want to honor the forgiveness from taxation that the federal government is now under.
Thank you. General, the amount at issue, the chief mentioned the $250 billion or the $500 billion. How do you deal with that? Because that seems to favor the argument that this is a major question.
Yes, Justice Sotomayor. So of course we acknowledge that this is an economically significant action, but I think that that can't possibly be the sole measure for triggering application of the major questions doctrine. In prior cases, the court has pointed to economic and political significance, but it's also reviewed a litany of additional factors that have demonstrated that based on common sense understandings of how Congress is likely to legislate, the agency is claiming extravagant regulatory authority that it doesn't actually have. And I think if the court were to just look at costs alone, it would take the major questions doctrine outside of that extraordinary case because national policies these days frequently do involve more substantial costs or trigger political controversy. Here, we think that there are any number of additional factors that demonstrate that this does not fit the major questions paradigm. And the first thing I would point to is that this is not an assertion of regulatory authority at all. This is the administration of a benefits program. And the court in prior cases has recognized that using common sense interpretations of understanding how Congress would legislate, Congress might pause before empowering the executive to engage in extravagant regulation with the corresponding cost to individual liberty interests. But in the context of a benefits program, there's not that same reason to hesitate about what Congress might have intended because it's perfectly logical for Congress to broadly empower the executive to provide benefits, especially in a crisis situation or an emergency like we've seen with COVID-19.
General,